Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Not Your Mama's Murder, the podcast where each week we talk about a different true crime case. I'm your host, Elisa Birdhill, and this week we will be talking about Anthony Allen Shore. Now, for this case, right at the top here, I do want to give a trigger warning for basically everything. I realize that this is true crime. We expect bad things to happen. We expect crime. It's never a field of roses or anything, what we're doing here. But this one is pretty gruesome. I have never been a person to sugarcoat anything, especially when we're talking about the offender themselves. I want it to be known how serious the offense was. So I do feel like it's important to talk about it, but details can be graphic. So please take care when listening. If this episode, if this episode is not for you, I get it, I understand. Feel free to turn it off, but just know up front, this is not a good story. So I just wanted to get that out of the way before I get into anything. And with that being said, we will go ahead and jump right in. Tiffany Shore grew up thinking her dad, Anthony, was just like other dads. She said her dad was funny and smart and talented and charming and handsome and. She said that she could have gone on and on about how much she admired him. She said he was an involved parent who often took her and her sister to the park, the beach, and to Renaissance fairs, and that they enjoyed doing arts and crafts together as a family. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she and her sister actually stayed with her dad while her mom moved in with her new boyfriend. Tiffany was so excited to be with her dad full time. She quickly learned, however, that maybe her dad's wouldn't be all she thought it would be. Food was very scarce for Tiffany growing up. She recalled the main staple of her diet was peanut butter. Her dad would buy the large industrial-sized peanut butter tubs for her and her sister, and that's primarily what they survived on. Tiffany recalled sometimes it would get taken over by ants or other pests. She specifically only said other pests, but the only other thing I can think of is roaches, which makes my skin crawl for her. Anyways, their dad would tell them just to eat it anyways, or that they could starve. Meanwhile, he would be buying, cooking, and eating steak right in front of both girls. Then to add salt to that wound, the girls would have to clean up his dishes of his nice nutritional meal that they didn't get to eat. If Tiffany and her sister ever questioned why they were never allowed anything other than peanut butter while he had good meals, their dad, Anthony, would just tell them that he was the man of the house. He earned the money, and so he deserved a good meal. If they wanted something else, they could go out and get jobs and buy their own food to make. While they were surviving on only peanut butter, Anthony would also spend large amounts of money on materialistic things for them, the things people could see from the outside. The girls were always well dressed, had nice toys and bikes, and appeared to be well taken care of from the outside looking in. Along those same lines, in order to keep the girls quiet about the things going on inside the house, he would do things to make him seem like a cool parent. He would even provide the girls with alcohol and cigarettes. Tiffany said she started smoking and drinking at around the age of 9, after about a year of being with her dad. Which, to note, not only is that incredibly wrong, obviously, those things are actually far more expensive than just buying the girls some nutritional food. I'm sure they would have thought he was great had he just provided the basic necessities that their bodies probably craved. I gotta tell you, my daughter is 9, and the thought of her with a cigarette or alcohol actually makes me physically sick to my stomach. We actually had a discussion today on the way home from school. Apparently, sorry, I'm getting a little off track here, but if you've seen the headlines recently, an all-star cheerleader died from drinking Alani. Her teacher was asking her class, do you or anybody in your family drink an energy drink? And just kind of a PSA, like, If so, be careful. Here are some dangers. Just letting them know in case they didn't know. And she told me that she actually informed her teacher that she definitely cannot have energy drinks. She can't even have soda because her mom says caffeine is like a drug. And she's right. I do say that. So no caffeine. She gets a Sprite occasionally as a treat, or a root beer. She can do root beer too because that's caffeine free for a treat. It is not a daily, not even a weekly thing. It is very rare. So the thought of, alcohol and tobacco is insane to me for a 9-year-old. Anyways, it wasn't long after living with their dad that Tiffany began to realize other things that weren't typical. She said that things were very scripted for them. The girls knew how to act and what to say in certain situations, along with that went looking perfect and spotless at all times. Again, it's all about outsider perspective for Anthony. Tiffany said if her and her sister ever thought about acting out while they were in public, they knew they would pay for it when they got home because all hell would break loose. Tiffany recounted a morning where she was running behind getting out the door for school, and because of that, her dad lost it. He started screaming profanities at her and her sister, even though her sister was on time, calling them brats and other names and throwing things at them. She said any little minor inconvenience or anything out of the ordinary like this would cause a chain reaction of events that were very scary. Tiffany and her sister both assumed that this is how any dad was, that they themselves were the problem, that they were out of line and his reactions were understandable and how any dad would react. They tried their best not to set him off, but as they grew older, Anthony's anger became more uncontrollable and he quickly became more violent. I think it goes without saying that these type of men, or abusers I should say, don't like to be questioned. But what do preteen and teenagers do? They question everything, which is how they find out about the world. It's why 14 is such a formative time in a child's life. Unfortunately, with Anthony, any bit of questioning or not immediately complying ended in physical abuse. Tiffany said her father would often spank their feet and heads because that's what's easy to hide, but he would also pull their hair and hit them in other parts of their bodies. They also weren't allowed to just be kids. They couldn't play too rough, giggle too loud, and absolutely no sisterly fights whatsoever. Anthony wouldn't allow the girls to cry at all. Even if they were being beaten, no crying was allowed. He despised crying and said it was for the weak and not allowed in his house. The more the girls would cry, the more upset Anthony would get and the harder they would be beaten. Eventually, the punishment for crying became being tied up in a blanket, which I did not understand at first, but essentially the way it was described is as if you were to swaddle a full-size child like they were a newborn. He would wrap them tightly in a sheet where their arms were pinned to their side, then proceed to cover their faces with a pillow, smothering them, and not releasing it until the crying stopped, even if that meant that the girls were blacking out. Tiffany said eventually her and her sister learned to not show any emotion in the presence of their father, not only not crying, but also never getting too overwhelmed or excited or tired. They learned to suppress everything. The only time they would be vulnerable was with each other. They coped together with the violence. They attempted to keep each other safe and out of trouble with their father, which of course led to them being very close. As the girls got older and they were able to be left alone, Anthony started working as a telephone repairman. Tiffany said that he would leave early in the mornings and not return home until late at night. Of course, as a child, she never thought anything about it beyond the fact that he had long days and nights doing a hard job like most parents. The issue, though, is that when he would leave for these long 12-plus hour shifts, he would lock the girls inside the house so that they couldn't leave. Not only by deadbolting the door from the outside, but he also nailed boards into the windows so they couldn't get out that way. He made it impossible for them to get out. Then, of course, because this train is never late, He blamed it on trying to keep them safe from the dangers of the outside world. It wasn't to keep the girls in, it was to keep everything else out. Now, don't forget that Anthony wants to be the fun, cool dad. So at the same time as he's being a monster, he would do things to make him seem fun. He would allow his daughters to have friends over for sleepovers every so often, which I've said it for years, and I'm sorry to all the amazing single dads out there doing it right, but my daughter would never go to a sleepover where the man is the only parent. I mean, I'm paranoid actually, so my daughter doesn't go to any sleepover that isn't family, because you can't trust anyone, not even mothers or brothers, or really even the so-called friends themselves. You just never know. So, no sleepovers. Anyway, when the girls had these sleepovers, their dad would go out of his way to make sure they had a good time. Specifically, he really loved for the girls to be able to play dress up, and he liked to be involved. He liked to pick their outfits and help with their hair and makeup. Then they would put on a fashion show or a concert. Tiffany said the outfits he chose were always inappropriate. Crop tops, halter tops, short shorts, and dresses that didn't cover very much. In the moment, it felt like fun, getting to dress up like something you weren't and wearing something you can never wear in real life. But reflecting back as an adult, she said that she looked and felt like, quote, a prostitute, which that's the word she used. I know that we say sex worker now. I'm just quoting her directly. Tiffany said that while they were playing dress up, her dad was always around, keeping an eye on the girls, and sometimes he would even record them. Now, this is the time of camcorders and home movies, so I'm sure nothing about that seemed or felt odd. But of course, we wouldn't be talking about this story if it were just an innocent dad throwing the best slumber party ever for his daughters and making sure that they had memories on film to never forget it. A really special tradition for the girls was that before bed every night, their dad would make them hot chocolate. It was the one fun special drink they got, and they looked forward to it every night. Tiffany's sister one time asked her if her hot chocolate tasted funny. Tiffany said yes, but it's probably just the cheap version. So they thought nothing about it. But eventually, the girls both noticed that after drinking the hot chocolate, they would be sleepy, and the next thing they knew, it would be morning. I'm sure you know where this is going. In today's time, people give their kids melatonin before bed to help them settle down and fall asleep. So this could be the 80s version of that. But again, we wouldn't be here if it were a completely innocent father with a fun nightly tradition with his daughters. Like I said, I'm sure you can imagine what was happening during all those nights that the girls didn't remember falling asleep. But one night, Tiffany woke up in the middle of the night, and she woke up to her father in her room. She was completely naked, and he was inserting his fingers into her. Tiffany was scared and didn't know what to do, so she pretended to still be asleep. She was afraid that if he knew he had been caught, he would see her as a threat and hurt her even more, or possibly even kill her. After this night, Tiffany started realizing that there had been times before where weird things had happened, but she could only remember bits and pieces because she was in and out of consciousness from being drugged. She remembered hearing her door opening and closing. She remembered waking up one time with her pants inside out, and she would wake up very sore sometimes. It all finally started to make sense to Tiffany, and as much as she wanted it to not be true, she knew it was. But she didn't want to tell anyone because she was ashamed, which we all know is often the case with victims of sexual abuse. She didn't even tell her sister. Tiffany said it had been clear that she was her dad's favorite. He treated her better than her sister. He told her she was smarter and prettier, and now it all made sense to Tiffany why he acted that way. She thought that if she just stayed quiet about the abuse, she could protect it. She could protect her sister from it happening to her. She thought she was clearly Anthony's preference, which we know now, obviously. Typically, it's not a looks preference, it is an age preference, which is unfortunate. Tiffany started being more aware that the sexual abuse was becoming more often. I can't help but wonder if she was growing and he was no longer sure exactly how much of the drug he needed to use to keep her knocked out. Whatever the case, she knew it was happening more, so I can't imagine how often it was happening before. And she had no idea how many times it was still happening and how many times she was completely unaware of altogether. Tiffany said she felt like she deserved her abuse, sexual or physical. She said she never felt like she lived up to the child that her father wanted her to be, and she felt guilty, like she deserved whatever punishment he decided to give her. Tiffany never planned to tell, but thankfully for her, a teacher paying attention called CPS and reported bruises on both of the girls. Unfortunately, Anthony had a heads up about the visit from CPS before they came, which gave him enough time to not only scare the girls with stories of them being split up and put into foster care, but also gave him time to prep them on exactly what to say if they were questioned. He gave them a script and told them he expected them to act perfect. They were clean, well-dressed children with their hair done when CPS arrived. Anthony put dinner on the stove, so that proved that they had food and the house smelled good. The girls painted smiles on their faces and acted their asses off while they were being questioned, and CPS dismissed the case, as they often do. And of course, as it so often happens, after CPS was notified, the abuse got worse. By this time, Tiffany was feeling pretty helpless. Her self-worth was low, and she just wanted out. She had remembered seeing on TV that people would take pills to overdose, so that was her plan. She locked herself in the bathroom, found a bottle of over-the-counter medicine, and took them all. She started feeling very sick, but ultimately survived her attempted suicide. Her dad refused to take her to the hospital and essentially just told her not to be so sad. Tiffany remembered being very hurt that her father didn't care at all that she had tried to take her own life, but her sister cared. She cared a lot. Tiffany's sister begged her not to ever leave her alone with their father, which worked out because suddenly Anthony didn't want the girls anymore. Anthony had called his mother and asked if Tiffany and her sister could come spend the summer with her. He had met a woman, and he wanted to move her in and have a honeymoon phase, without the girls, of course. At first, their grandmother said no, it wasn't a good time for her to be caring for 2 children. But Anthony threw a fit and told his mother if she didn't take them now, she would never see them again. So she did take them. The girls packed 1 suitcase each, planning to go spend a month with their grandmother. What they didn't know is they wouldn't return home again. When it came time for them to go home, the girls' aunt came over and was talking to them about the possibility of Tiffany's sister coming to live with her. The sister had been struggling in school, which we know is typical of children that come from abusive homes, but the aunt had offered to take her to live with her to try a new school district for a semester. This would mean Tiffany would return home to her father alone. Immediately upon hearing this, Tiffany began to cry and panic and refused to go home without her sister. She was afraid not only that the abuse would get worse, but that her father may even kill her if her sister was not there to be a witness. She knew he didn't care if she lived or died already, and without a witness, she was terrified at what could happen. Tiffany had such a panic attack that she couldn't hold it in any longer, and she just spilled and told her aunt everything. That her dad was violent and had hurt them both, that he was molesting her, and that he was angry all the time. As soon as she said it, Tiffany was afraid her aunt wouldn't believe her, since that was her brother. But much to her surprise, her aunt immediately told her she would never let that happen again. She apologized she hadn't recognized the signs sooner, and she asked how long it had been going on. Then the aunt and grandmother talked to Tiffany's sister to get her side of things. Remember, Tiffany had never told her sister about any of the sexual assault, but her sister told their grandmother the same thing. He had been molesting her too. They both stayed quiet to protect each other, thinking it wasn't happening to the other one. Thankfully, the family reported Anthony for the molestation of his daughters. He took a plea deal and was sentenced to 8 years probation, and he had to register as a sex offender. I'm going to read that again. He took a plea deal and was sentenced to only 8 years probation, and he had to register as a sex offender. He served only a couple of weeks in jail while waiting for his case to work its way through the court system. Thankfully, the girls were able to stay with their grandmother. They had no contact with their dad at all. Unfortunately, though, they lived in fear that he would come and find them and take revenge on them for telling on him. He never did, but that doesn't mean damage wasn't being done from afar. Tiffany's sister struggled with her mental health and would actually often run away from her grandmother's house. Tiffany's relationship with her sister had suffered due to all the harm being caused by their father and having to relive the case. The last time Tiffany's sister ran away, Tiffany was 15, and after that, she didn't hear from her very much, until one day her sister just randomly showed back up, mortified. Her sister told her that their father was being arrested and charged with being a serial killer. Tiffany turned on the news and soon learned that her father was suspected of being the killer that was running rampant for over a decade, killing young women and girls by using a ligature with a bamboo stick to strangle them, otherwise known as the tourniquet killer. So, he actually killed his victims in the same manner as the way JonBenét was found, which I actually don't think is a coincidence at all. I think it makes sense that while staging a crime, you would do something that you have seen in the news and on headlines recently. Just food for thought in terms of the JonBenét case, because her tourniquet was made from a paintbrush handle found inside the Ramsey home. So, just something to think about. After seeing the news and getting over the initial shock, Tiffany started putting things together and realizing there were more signs that she realized that made it make sense that her father was the killer. First of all of those early mornings and late nights she thought he was working. That was all during the years that he was out killing. She then recalled that he had a work van, which y'all should know I only ever refer to that as a murder van, and this is exactly why. Tiffany remembered her dad had taken the seats out of the back, explaining it away as needing room for his tools. As part of his plea deal for molesting his daughters, Anthony had to give a DNA sample. That sample eventually was linked to the murder of Maria Estrada. Anthony's DNA was matched to the DNA found under her fingernails. He was brought in for questioning, and after an 11-hour interrogation, he confessed to murdering not only Maria, who was 21 at the time of her death, but also 15-year-old Lori Tremblay, Diana Roblar, who was only 9, a 16-year-old named Dana Sanchez as well. He also confessed to raping 14-year-old Selma Jenks inside her home, but he ultimately left her alive. All of these murders took place from 1986 to 1995, while Anthony had custody of his daughters. Lori Tremblay was the first victim. She was walking to school when he attacked her, sexually assaulted her, and dumped her body behind a Mexican restaurant. She was only strangled using a ligature, so the police had no way of connecting him to her had he not confessed. When they asked him why he switched his MO, he was honest and told them that it hurt his fingers trying to kill Lori. Then there's a gap. Maria is the next victim, and she wasn't killed until 1992. I find it hard to believe that he just took 6 years off. At the very least, I'm sure he was still raping women, along with, of course, molesting his daughters at home. But I can't help but think that there may be more victims that he just didn't confess to for whatever reason, or that they can't be linked to him. Anyway, in 1992, Maria was assaulted, killed, and her body dumped behind a Dairy Queen, where it would later be found the same day. In 1993 is when he broke into the home of 14-year-old Zelma Jinks, raped her, and then fled on foot. I can't help but think he got spooked for some reason or another, especially being inside someone's home. Then in 1994 comes Diana, who was only 9 years old. She was last seen leaving a local grocery store, but she never returned home. She was later found near a loading dock of a building. Police were given a lead about a van that frequented the area. That van would later be a match to the one Anthony owned. She was also linked due to being strangled with the same bamboo as Maria, which this brings us to 1995, where Anthony offered 16-year-old Dana Sanchez a ride. She accepted the ride. Then he made sexual advances, and after she rejects the sexual advances, he attacked her, raped her, and strangled her, leaving her body in a field. After 7 days of her not being found, Anthony actually made an anonymous call to a local news station to report her body. As far as we are aware, he never killed again. 1996 is when he married the woman he sent his daughters away for, and she quickly divorced him, citing physical abuse. She also made reports during the divorce that he was violent with his daughters and that she suspected he may be sexually assaulting them as well. Again, nothing was done by authorities about that report. At his trial, both daughters testified against their father for the years of abuse they had suffered. His living victim, Selma, also testified. Anthony pled guilty on all accounts and actually asked for the death penalty. Tiffany also agreed that her father should receive the death penalty, and that is exactly what he got. In November of 2004, he was sentenced to death, and in January of 2018, Anthony Allen Shore became the first person of the year to be executed. He was 55, and his last words were, "Whoa-wee, I can feel that." Tiffany went on to give many interviews about the life with her dad, and I actually used a lot of what she had to say in her story here for this. Unfortunately, she did say that her and her sister do not stay in touch. Her sister continued to struggle with mental health, and quote, "She just didn't want to be found, so we lost her." And that's actually why I didn't use the sister's name here. It's out there if you go looking, but I imagine that she changed her name legally and she wants to leave it all behind. And so I hope that she is healed and happy and living her best life, and that she and Tiffany both are able to put their past behind them. You know, this case actually reminds me a lot of the Tanner Horner case that has been in the media a lot lately, and I even talked about it on In the Headlines. I mentioned there, and before I say this, it is all allegedly. It is my opinion. There's nothing factual about it. Okay? So, allegedly. I find it very hard to believe that Athena Strand, may she rest in peace, was his first victim. I think, especially being into true crime. If you're here, you're into true crime. I am into true crime. I think that we all know it's very rare for an offender to go from 0 to 100 like that. You don't go from never harming anyone or anything to kidnapping, rape, and murder, and dumping a body. It's not a linear path. It's not a logical jump. I know that during the trial of Tanner, there were a couple of 16-year-olds that came forward, and I believe them. I absolutely do. I think there are probably more out there. Maybe victims that were so young they didn't know it was happening, or they didn't realize it was bad. But I definitely think that Tanner likely, at the very least, I think he was molesting other children that he may have regularly had access to. At the very most, it would not surprise me at all if down the road there's a set of remains found and his DNA's under their fingernails. It really would not surprise me. In fact, I think, and I'm sure law enforcement has done their job, but go back on all of his routes, see what jobs he worked before, see what area of the country he has been in, and see if there are any other missing children where he has been. I cannot imagine that Athena Strand was his first victim. He was calm while committing the crime, as can be heard on the audio. He was calm following the crime. He called his boss, explained why he should have the same vehicle the next day for work. He explained away the smell by saying he got sick in the car. He explained away why it would look like it had been cleaned, because he said he got sick and had to clean it. All of those just at the top of his head, very calm. He slowly and methodically took her clothes and put them into his backpack, making sure to take time to stop and smell her underwear. I almost said panties, but that feels gross in this term. So underwear. He stopped and sniffed them before putting him in his backpack. That is not someone who this is their first offense. I'm sorry, it's just not. He clearly had urges about children. And so I find it very hard to believe that for all these years of his life, he has been able to suppress those urges. And then the one time he finally gives in is when there happens to be a camera and he gets caught. And speaking of that camera, he gave in and took her knowing that the camera was there, because it was later covered with a sticky note. So, I don't know. I couldn't help but think about that case that is fresh on my mind because it's been in the news while talking about this case of Anthony Shore. And I don't mean to take away from Tiffany and her sister and the story or the victims that he did murder. It's just because it's fresh. But the similarities are crazy, because with Anthony Shore, his first victim that he did kill was not really his first victim. He had years and years of victimizing his daughters. I imagine probably his first wife. I don't know. It didn't say. I didn't find anything in my research suggesting that he harmed his first wife, but I imagine her life probably couldn't have been good, especially after learning that is a reason his second wife cited for their divorce, and she picked up on the abuse for his daughters. Maybe he didn't molest his daughter's friends at those sleepovers, but they were also victimized by him by being dressed up and treated like playthings that he could record. And maybe they were molested. That's what I'm saying. Maybe they were molested. They were given the hot chocolate with the drugs in it, and it happened, and they don't know. That is very possible, and I think it's possible with Tanner Horner as well. I don't know. This is a very sad case. It's always hard when the parent is the offender, because as a parent, it's hard to imagine someone wanting to hurt their own child in that way. But it happens. Unfortunately, it happens. I mean, Gabriel Fernandez is a case that we will definitely cover, but it's, again, very similar. CPS was involved, and they came out, and nothing was done, and he died as a result. Our system is broken. It's very sad. Some parents suck. It's very sad. There's unfortunately no happy ending with this case. I mean, I guess the happy ending is the death penalty for both of these, for Anthony and for Tanner Horner. I don't think I've talked about my opinions on the death penalty, so I could do that now. I don't mean to get too heavy. I was raised conservative, Southern Baptist, Christian, Republican. And I will say that as I have grown up and had a mind for my own and things like that, my beliefs have changed based on just gathering my own information. I've learned and grown, and I want to do better. And so the reason I bring this up is because, I was taught growing up an eye for an eye. And so that would be the death penalty. You kill someone, you get put to death. Oh, well, that makes sense. And part of me does get that. However, we know that there are situations where innocent people have been put to death. And that is something that should never happen. I think that if we have 99 bad guys, we have 99 guilty parties, and one innocent party, and the question is, do we let all 99 of those go to spare the one that's innocent, or do we kill the one that's innocent? I think we have to let everyone go. I think you have to be correct 100% of the time for the death penalty to work the way it's supposed to. And unfortunately, with that broken system I was just talking about, it is impossible to be correct 100% of the time. I personally think that with the death penalty, we need to have stricter requirements. We have extenuating circumstances on murder charges often. I think that there needs to be a checklist when it comes to death penalty cases where each criteria has to be met. And if each of those criteria are not met, then it takes the death penalty off of the table. Like, for example, I'm not saying this for sure, but let's, for example, say it's 5 things. 5 undeniable things that 100% prove that this person, or even these people, if it's more than one, are guilty of this crime. And if you check off every single one of those boxes, sure, sentence them to death. If it does not check off every single one of those boxes, then it has to be life without the possibility. That is my opinion. I do not expect anyone or everyone to agree with me. I think that that would simply help. First of all, it would make it more clear for jurors. Jurors are made up of your peers. They haven't been to law school. They don't know the law. And so it's oftentimes really hard to get 12 people to agree on putting someone to death. And so I think just making the guidelines to be eligible for the death penalty more clear would be super helpful in that way. With that being said, I think that that also would make the time spent on death row be shorter. If you're familiar with death row, you know that often it is 30 years from the time they are sentenced to death to the time they are actually executed. A lot of them actually die before being executed by their state that they live in, because they've been there so long. And that's important. It's important for them to have their due process and their time to file their appeals and make sure that they are innocent. But I think that if you have this criteria, and at trial they checked off every single box in this criteria, then those appeals are a little less likely to happen. So instead of spending 30 years trying to appeal your case, maybe you're only going to spend 5 or 10. And I will say, in the case of Tanner Horner, he is in Texas. Texas is one of those states that don't play around about their death penalty. In California, you can still be sentenced to death, but you never will be executed. It is commuted to life without the possibility of parole. That is what, Lacey Peterson's husband, whatever his name is, that's what he's serving. There's so many Peterson crimes that I can't even keep them straight. Scott. That one's Scott. He is serving life without the possibility of parole, even though he was sentenced to death, because California no longer has the death penalty. They do not do executions in California anymore. Texas is not like that. In Texas, when you're sentenced to death, you're sentenced to death. Yes, there are cases where it still takes 30 years in Texas. But the average in Texas is 11 years. 11.5, I think, is what I saw. So it is possible that within the next decade, he could be executed. I think Tanner Horner's case 100% meets the requirements for the death penalty. I have studied a lot of true crime cases. I think Tanner Horner's case may be the strongest death penalty case I have ever seen. There's audio, there's video. He lied, he pled guilty, he tried to cover his tracks. All of these things make it a perfect death penalty case, in my opinion. Now, like I said, I'm not always for the death penalty. I am for the death penalty in the case of Tanner Horner. And I'm so glad the jury agreed. I'm so glad that Athena Strand and her family got the justice that they deserve. And I hate to be this way, but I do hope that execution is carried out sooner rather than later. In this case, I don't mean to make it all about Tanner Horner, because Tiffany's story is just as important. Let me pull my notes back up here. In this case, I know that he was murdered in January of 2018. I can't remember when he was sentenced. Let me just go back. 2004. So he did not wait long either to be executed. And I think that when you have made that decision, it is better to just do it quickly and get it over with. Now, I'm not saying that Anthony Shore's case was as strong as Tanner Horner's. I'm not saying that at all. I don't know that his would have met that criteria that I was talking about. But I do think that when you have your own daughter saying, yeah, give him the death penalty, let's not let him sit on death row for 30 years. Let's get him in and get him out. That's all I have for today. I didn't mean for it to get so heavy, and I feel like I'm kind of worked up actually, and I didn't mean for that to happen either. But sometimes these cases just get me. I think especially when it's a parent, it's just so hard to wrap your head around and understand it. And then of course when all of the other victims were young, I mean a 9-year-old, a 16-year-old, I think the oldest was 21. It's just hard. It's hard to wrap your brain around how is a grown person attracted to a child, and why did they have to die, and I don't know. It's a lot of questions, always more questions than answers, which is unfortunate. So anyways, join us next week when we'll be back for a new story.